Got the numbers? Yep. And we'll go to item 19. This is a quarterly update on our Council and Crown joint work program on housing and urban growth. And Penny Perrott, this is your area. Penny, in your hands, and we've read the report, and I think it's reasonably straightforward, but please home in on some of the areas where we have got key work to do.
Okay, so I wasn't going to talk too much about the update. It is a quarterly update that this committee requested of the joint work program between Auckland Council and the Crown. I will just point to some key areas of progress that has been made since we reported to you last in March. One, we've had the Crown, Cabinet has endorsed the joint work program, and we've had the four ministers, Minister Twyford, Minister Salisa, Minister Mahuta and Minister Parker, sign off on the terms of reference in the joint work program. We are progressing a number of the work streams, so we have had joint Crown and Council workshops on social infrastructure needs and jewellery, so that's a nice add to the structure planning work that you've just endorsed, is that there is a work stream now looking at if that's the kind of growth that will happen in the Drury area, what is the social infrastructure in terms of schools, hospitals, parks, community facilities, and we're doing work with the Crown on that. As you also heard earlier, there is a significant transport deficit in Drury, and we've got a Crown joint work program which is looking at how to program the preferred transport network in a manner that delivers public transport earlier, but also fills a large funding gap in providing that transport infrastructure, which is north of $2 billion. So it's a big piece of work that we're doing with the Crown on that. It's going to take about 8 to 10 months to come back with some options for consideration. We've also been doing work with the Ministry for the Environment and the Property Council on understanding how to get the best efficient use out of the terrace housing and apartment zone. That's our highest residential zone in Auckland, and while we're progressively seeing an uptake in more apartments, terrace houses being built in that zone, there are some question marks about whether or not we are getting the best use out of some sites in that area. And so we've been working with both the Ministry and Property Council to understand what might be some of the barriers, both regulatory and non-regulatory, to getting the best use of that zone. Lastly, what we have also worked on with the Crown, and this is particularly out of our finance area, is looking at alternative funding mechanisms for infrastructure. And we are looking at 4 pilot areas: Mount Roskill, Red Hills, Tamaki and Drury, as ways of taking real life examples of either existing development areas or proposed development areas, and how are we going to fund the infrastructure that's needed, not often just to cater for growth, but also to deal with existing transport or infrastructure issues in those areas. And that's very much across all of those 4 pilots. So just happy to answer any questions. I've also got Anna Jennings with me, who's taken over the role of Principal Policy Advisor in this space.
Well, welcome Anna in that new role and authoring this report. Questions? Councillor Watson.
Thank you. So when you refer to the review of the terraced house and apartment building zone, I take it from your comments, Penny, that that's largely going to revolve around, maximising the sites that exist in terms of yield, as opposed to elements to do perhaps with maybe visual appearance and affordability, that type of functioning of this zone.
So in terms of this zone not only provides the greater opportunity for apartments and terrace houses, but it also has significant urban design requirements around it. And so it's neither one or the other. It's saying if we've developed this zone, which is largely located around our town centres and rapid transit networks, how can we ensure that rather than a site just being developed for a single house, how can we actually get more units in those areas? But it's certainly making sure that the urban design principles that have been applied and looking at what might be some of the barriers to affordable housing is all part of that consideration. And the idea is that we will report back to the Planning Committee in the new term of where that work has got to.
I'll make a few comments on that, Mr. Chair, at the appropriate time then.
Member Henry.
Kia ora. Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. Is there any opportunity for the IMSB Board Secretariat to be included in the work program steering group?
Through the Chair, so we have received that request from the Chief Executive, and we are looking at how we can work that through. Well, we will have to talk to our Crown agencies as well, and we've got a meeting this week to discuss that.
Thank you. Further questions here, members? Councillor Clow, please.
When are we going to get a report back on the Urban Development Agency's identified locations? It says August 2019.
So in terms of that, the work around Kaingaora, from the Crown's point of view, is taking longer than perhaps originally expected when the work program was put together. At that time, there was an expectation that the bill that not only set up Kaingaora but also gave it its special powers would go through in April this year. As I've reported previously, we've only had the bill that sets up the organisation, and we put in a submission to the Select Committee on that at the last Planning Committee meeting. And Councillor Darby has given a video presentation on our submission last week. We are still waiting to see the bill around the special powers that will be assigned to Kaingaora, and Kaingaora itself is not yet a dedicated entity until the 1st of October. So we have met with, I suppose, what is a group of existing staff across Housing New Zealand, HLC and parts of Kiwi Build who have been pulled together in the transition phase under the title of Urban Development Group to start a conversation about what might be the guiding principles to identify new areas where Kaingaora might want to operate in Auckland. But it would be fair to say that hasn't progressed probably as quickly as we hoped it would be, because they are still obviously setting up the entity and understanding the direction from their new minister and also from Cabinet.
So is the bill actually going to specify some areas? I say that, Penny, because obviously and you know one of them, there's a lot of disquiet out there in certain areas where they believe they've been identified, and they just want to know what's happening, just like we want to know what's happening where, more specifically.
So I don't believe that the next bill will identify any particular areas, but in saying that, I don't think that will stop the new entity from identifying what might be their priority areas even before that second bill comes out. Remember, the second bill gives them the special powers, perhaps of planning or setting rates, etc. But there may be areas where they believe, because of Crown land holdings already, or because there's a willing landowner, that they can start actually looking at those areas as priority areas now without needing those special powers. And so I don't think that the two of them are they're not reliant on each other. I think when you see that new entity up and running on the 1st of October, they will be setting what the priority areas are pretty quickly. And my understanding is they are having those conversations with Minister Wood over the next few months. Yeah.
Thank you. Questions from, firstly, Councillor Walker, then Member Namani, and then Member Hanare. Walker.
So, in respect of this process, is there information that's being captured around the problems that we're having that go to intensification across Auckland? And I'm particularly thinking of problems that I'm experiencing in the Albany ward, where the terraced housing and the like is generating a lot of conflict with people that aren't necessarily in that zone but overlook it or interact with it, and particularly circumstances where developers are pushing for heights beyond what's allowed in the unitary plan, and intensification over and above what's even allowed in the unitary plan. So are we actively monitoring and getting feedback from the community?
So at the moment there is a program which has been set up under Plans and Places, which is monitoring the outcomes of the unitary plan. So it covers a wide number of different outcomes, but one of the outcomes is understanding through collecting evidence and data from resource consenting and from other areas whether or not the unitary plan is achieving the outcomes in each of the zones. My understanding of that work, and Megan might be able to amplify on it, is that Plans and Places are looking to bring back a monitoring report in the first half of next calendar year, and part of that will tease out whether or not the outcomes that were agreed on for each of the zones is actually achieving those outcomes. At this stage, that work is very much based on data collection and evidence. It hasn't gone out for a general conversation with the community. It wouldn't normally do that because as monitoring, it does have to be based on that kind of information, but I'm sure that as that program progresses, that there will be an opportunity for perhaps the committee to work out whether or not they think there needs to be other views brought into that conversation.
Through you, Mr. Chair, is it possible to have something more urgently than, let's say, 6 months out? I mean, the unitary plan is now somewhat advanced. We've got stuff happening on the ground, some of which is not good for communities. I can point to Hobsonville, for example, where there are issues around accessibility in developments that are held up to be very successful, but on the ground there is active criticism of how these areas are actually working. And my concern, Mr. Chair, is that we need that feedback much earlier than later. Otherwise, we're seeing successive developments occurring on the ground that are repeating the problems that we already have. So my question is, can we have something in advance of, let's say, 6 months out? Or, actually longer than that.
Had a workshop on the monitoring program. I'm sure you had that at a recent meeting, and a program was outlined to us, and my understanding is the members accepted that program. We are fully aware of those work requirements. The work streams are underway, but you don't just cherry pick data. You've got to take it from right across the region, and it's going to be a comprehensive monitoring report. It's required of us, and the organisation is doing that. And as soon as there is a cohesive data set available, it will be before us. And that has been confirmed by our staff.
Through you, Mr. Chair, my concern is that I think many of us as councillors are largely unaware of the problems that communities are experiencing across Auckland. We really need to know, and we need this information on an updated basis, not just maybe once a year, once every 6 months.
I've just given you the answer, so you're sort of repeating the same question. So I've responded, the staff have responded. I think we have to leave it there. There is a very clear program on monitoring. It's a requirement of us. Now I'm repeating myself. So the work is underway. Member nominee?
Kia ora, just a question on, and you may be able to answer it or you may not, whether you think, and I'm going to the mana whenua matters rather than mātāwaka, but where do they fit in this whole process? Like knowing potentially that at some point in time in the future there may well be Crown land availability, and just like the previous government go through a whole process that joins people up again with at that point with the Tamaki Collective. I'm just wondering if you think it's okay that, I guess, mana whenua is sitting at a project level. Does the agreement consider at any point in time iwi perhaps being at a partnership level, at a co-design level, rather than, I guess, being out of the loop?
So the joint work program brings together projects and programs that either have already started between the Crown or ourselves, or areas where we felt that there were duplication or gaps in how we work together. In individual programs, and for example, Transform Manukau is one such area, there is a conversation about where mana whenua sits at, and particularly in that one around the governance table, and that is being worked through there. I suppose all I can say is that when this program was pulled together, that wasn't the conversation that was had between the two parties, and I'm probably looking, conversations about governance does sit with the elected representatives rather than with staff. So it might be more appropriate for somebody other than myself to answer that question, but certainly at individual projects and programs, that conversation about governance is being discussed, and particularly where the Crown is bringing to the table land that it owns and needs to have that conversation quite clearly with mana whenua. I mean, certainly in the submission that we gave on Kaingaora, which we worked with IMSB, with Brendan on, we did highlight the real importance of Kaingaora having to actually give effect to its treaty obligations, not just have the capability and capacity within it to understand the treaty obligations. And I think that's a really strong starting point for the work going forward with Kaingaora.
Thanks. I see the Māori impact statement there, and I do see reference to the Auckland plan, which is kind of in the council purvey. It would have been good to identify the treaty components as being relevant too, rather than, I guess, Māori being serviced by others rather than Māori being part of their own destiny. I mean, that's all, but I do appreciate some of the questions I asked aren't necessarily yours to answer.
Just reinforcing that too, our submission on the first bill, member nominee, the Kaingaora first bill, we did stress the importance for explicit reference to the Treaty of Waitangi. We actually gave an example of what's contained within the current Conservation Act from memory. And that, of course, was supported by independent Māori Statutory Board feedback as well. So your prompt is a good one to keep us on course for making sure.
I just think a potential opportunity lost that could have accelerated.
Thank you. It's a good reminder. Member Henry.
Sorry for coming back for a second bite. I should have asked it after you replied. What's your view on IMSB Secretariat being part of the steering group? No. Your answer to me was basically, I'll leave it up to the Crown or the elected officials to deal with. So I want to know what your view is.
So my view is that with any steering group, we need to make sure that the members of that steering group feel that they're adding value and have to their own work on being on that steering group. I do think that we create a lot of steering groups, both within the organisation and with other parties, where we're not really clear with each other about what is the value that being on that steering group adds to that party's own work program or own outcomes. And I suppose that's the conversation that I need to have with the IMSB CE, is what would be the added value they would want to get out of being on as a member of that steering committee. Because otherwise we're asking people to participate and their resources could be better used somewhere else if they feel they're not getting
that's
anything
nice
out of
that you
it.
think that our resources would be useful somewhere else. But if you have a look at Appendix B and you go through, you've got the Crown and you've got the council elected reps. None of those two bodies represent a Māori view, although Sister Nanaya is part of the Crown. She's the Crown. The other councillors are the council. Then you drop down to the executive group, and I don't even know who's on that executive group, the CEs from central government agencies and Auckland councils. I would suspect that TPK may or may not be in there somewhere, I'm not sure. Then you drop down again to the program steering group, and it's the officials from central government and Auckland Council. And I would have thought that either in there would have been our board secretariat, the Independent Māori Statutory Board, and maybe somebody from Council's Māori unit. Now I understand that that's not the case. And what I'm saying is that if you're talking about adding value, well, I think Independent Māori Statutory Board adds value all over the place. But I would say that. So I want to sort of try and drill down and, how is 16% of the population going to be part of this, designing whatever?
So I think you might have interpreted, or I did not make myself clear, it's not about whether or not IMSB would bring value to the table, it's whether or not they believe they would get anything from the other parties around the table that adds value to your work, and that's a question we have to work through. No decision's been made. I only received that request from your C late last week. As I've said, I need to have that conversation with the joint, the Crown parties, and really tease out for the benefit of IMSB to make sure that you get value out of coming to steering group meetings.
Okay, so you're going to have a conversation with the Crown reps. So that suggests to me that you're okay with IMSB. You're part of it. Council's part of it.
It's, from my point of view, I don't have a problem with IMSB being on the steering group. And if IMSB feels there is value on being on the steering group, and I think we need to tease that through. And secondly, we are in a joint work program, so we need to have that conversation. And as I've said, we have a meeting this week with the Crown side, and we certainly will have that on the agenda to discuss.
I'll just come in here, if I may, Member Hanoi. So we've signed the terms of reference off, and this came through a meeting. Now, it's just coming to me now that the IMSB is interested. Was this conveyed earlier, prior to the terms of reference being signed off? And I'm gathering it's the program steering group. Is that what you're taking an interest for? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the program steering group.
That's what my question was.
Okay. I just needed to make sure which steering group, because there's a couple there, and then there's the political governance group as well. So look,
I think we should be on that one too, but. Hey.
Can we get a formal request from the IMSB through? It is there now?
So through the chair, I received one from the CE last week.
Oh, okay, that's the one you're referring to. Okay, look, we'll pick this up with the staff and endeavour to try and resolve this particular point. Thank you.
Yeah, look, I'm trying to be an arsehole or anything, but
Wait on, we can't, please,
I know I
not
don't
here.
have to try, but I just wanted to answer about who makes the decision on whether people are brought on to the program steering group or any other group for that matter. And so, what I'm saying is it okay if it's okay with the Crown, then it must be their decision. And for our request to be put up, surely somebody must be able to speak to it when you guys get together. That's all my question is. It's not.
We'll do that. We'll pick this up and follow that line. We've got the formal, and I should have picked up on that. Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I'm not on the working group or any part of this, so this is being reported back, but it doesn't feel very fulsome for me, representing part of the Northwest. I see a lot of, there's part of the work program is City Centre to Mangere, but I don't see any mention of City Centre to Northwest. And I've just looked at the NZTA website, that's not been updated for a year. We don't even know what's happening. So I do feel that with 25% of the region's growth, there's one little mention of Red Hills, and we've already missed out on the opportunity for structure plans and a fulsome community debate as has happened in the south we heard earlier. It just feels like it's dropped off the radar. It's the drunk uncle who's fallen asleep behind the couch, just let's leave him there. But he actually does contribute to the household, but we'll just leave it quietly while he's asleep. And I just don't understand. I feel like, maybe Councillor Hulls does, but have no real overview of what's happening and how are we going to deal with the growth other than how we're going to pay for a few more internal roads in Red Hills. And it's not a criticism of our staff, because I actually think I feel like we're dancing to the government's tune here. They want to do City Centre and Mangere. They say they want to do Northwest, but there's no information out there, not heard a thing. It's almost like it's let's forget about it because we can't do it. And I'm really worried about this because it's not even on the work plan. There's some fabulous plans for other areas, but what are we going to do about this growth, and how are we going to transport people other than in cars on the motorway from as north as Waimalku, Riverhead and through West Auckland? It just doesn't feature, and it worries me dreadfully that we're not integrating the land use with the transport. There's nothing happening here.
What I'll do is I'll move this because there's a speaking term being taken, so I'll move it. Do I have a second, please? Yes. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So it's moved and
There's a
seconded.
question, where is it? What is happening, and why are the government not putting attention to it?
So, Penny Pruitt.
So in terms of the joint work program, if perhaps just to remind people that this joint work program was about how we could work with the Crown on things that added value in their urban growth agenda and in our growth strategy and the Auckland plan. There were things that we felt we could work on in a positive add value space. It didn't cover everything that is happening in the growth and urban development area in this council or in this council group, and you will know that in the Northwest you have had the Whenuapai structure plan that has talked about how to manage future growth and future urban areas around Whenuapai. There is also work underway where finance at a previous finance and performance committee meeting, the finance team came and talked about looking at the possibility of a targeted rate to deal with some of the infrastructure issues around Westgate and Red Hills. So there is work happening in that space, and what we do hope to be able to bring back in the new term is looking at how to integrate the land use that's already been determined in the Red Hills area and the Westgate area with some of the gaps that we see is happening there, because as you know, that land was live zoned through the independent hearings panel process before any structure planning was done. So there is a piece of work that we are pulling together about that wider area that will look at land use and infrastructure. It's early days. We're just scoping it up at the moment. So it's not a case of Auckland Council group not seeing that there are some pressing issues in the northwest in terms of growth and development. It's just that this is a report on the joint work program, that what we tried to do with the Crown and both parties was to keep it at a manageable level and focus on a few key things that at the time we pulled this together. And if you do remember, this was actually pulled together late last year, were the priorities that the Crown and the Council put forward. But I do want to reassure you, Councillor Cooper, that there is thinking and work around the northwest to get better alignment between land use, transport, but also the funding of that work as well.
Can I just ask a question? As you're a member of the working party, was there discussion that then discounted any work on or mention of a work program for the government for northwest city centre to northwest light rail?
Not my recollection.
So it just wasn't on the table.
No, it's. I would not say it's not on the table. It's very much.
So is it on the table?
It is an NZTA government project, and we all know that there are announcements pending. It's just a question of the timing on the
Announcements pending for nearly a year.
But
thank you. That's fine. And the other thing I want to say, because I
and
won't.
look, just like
Yeah.
rail to the North Shore is not showing up.
You've got
either.
a busway, Mr. Chairman. So I get that, but what I just in terms of
Councillor,
that,
you
I've got
don't need
another
to retort
question.
and dismiss. It's not really okay. So
but you were
there are a
retorting on
lot
me.
of projects under ATAP. A lot of projects. It has been confirmed there and through the RLTP. And there are work streams underway to address all of those. And the timing may not suit you or me. I would like things to come forward as well. But we are waiting for the government to make an announcement on LRT. And when that comes, it'll be a lot clearer.
So can I just, rather than speak again at the end, just to say, yes, I get all of that, and my real concern is that we've already got live zoning. This is not about future urban. This is live zoning an existing underserved community, and that's why I'm so passionate about it. So I apologise, but I know that you haven't got a train, but I do know that you've got a busway and you've actually had a lot of public transport, so great. But I'm speaking up for my community.
And just to let you also know, I've been working with the NZTA on bringing forward a program of motorway priority for buses on the Northwestern, and they are working that up right now.
We don't know about it.
We don't know about it, but thank you. We'll have a briefing after.
I'll just finish. Thank you, Councillor Cooper. That work is being worked up by NZTA, and they should be able to reveal that work later in the year and implement it, as they are providing bus priority measures on the Northern Motorway and other parts. So hopefully that program proceeds. Councillor Casey.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The work stream that interests me most is the work stream called affordable housing, and just as a preamble. It's a question, but I do have a preamble. Last week, Penny and Megan fronted a meeting between all the advisory panels and the executive leadership team on the subject of housing, and they did amazingly well. And it's the issues that were raised by the panels I want to raise in respect to that work stream. And so I'll raise them all, Penny, and then you can tell me if there's any interest in pursuing them, or if it is indeed actively being pursued. And if not, why not? So the first one is, and I know that this is being pursued, but it seems to be really slow, and that's the retained affordable housing option. I know it's in the mix with everything else, but it seems to me it's a lot easier than most. It was a political vote that got rid of it. We could easily do a political vote with the new council to get it back in, or is it not that easy? The second thing is universal access. I don't have any feeling that it's in the mix, so you can tell me about that. alternative housing configurations, especially things like Abbeyfield. Is that actively being looked at as part of that work stream? And finally, and one that you're probably going to say no to, but I think you shouldn't, based on a couple of hours I spent last night with the Rainbow Communities panel looking at homelessness and the fantastic work that this council is doing, leading the cross-sectoral work on homelessness for Auckland. I have to ask you why that's not part of that work stream, or is it indeed part of that work stream? And the answer to that might be that the government's not shifting on it as yet.
So in terms of that affordable housing work stream, that a lot of that work has been driven out of Kataraina Maki's area, and so you do get updates to the Environment and Community Committee on that work program. Where I suppose we're coming together with the Crown is looking at exactly some of those things. So in terms of the retained affordable housing rule, which sometimes is also called inclusionary zoning, that is a piece of work that we are working with MFE on a more wider New Zealand approach to that, and whether or not the RMA is the best tool on that. So that work, those discussions are happening as part of the piece of work that Kataraina's leading. In terms of the universal access issue, this committee did, as part of its submission on the building systems discussion document, put in quite a strong submission on the need for the building code to recognise that universal access should just be part of the standard requirements in standard homes, not necessarily a add-on for certain parts of the community. So we are yet to get feedback from them, from MB, about what they've done with the feedback that they received on that discussion document. But it is an issue that we do constantly raise with them, that it's important, as was discussed last week, it's not just about for people who have disabilities, it actually creates a more robust living environment if you do respect that. In terms of the alternative housing models, I will have to say I don't know enough about that area, but I certainly will ask Kat and me. I don't know if you have a better understanding of that, but I'll come back to you to say whether that's part of the work they're doing with the Crown. And in the last space, I think that the focus of the Crown has shifted to homelessness. Certainly the team of people that Kataraina her people have been interacting with, putting more emphasis on the homelessness issue as something that they've had direction from the Crown to really focus on, and perhaps that's something we could get an update for you on after the meeting. Yeah.
One issue that took up quite a lot of airtime at the Housing Forum was the issue of renters.
Yeah.
And you answered the questions well, but again I ask, in terms of that work stream, is there any work being done on protections for renters?
Protections for renters. There is some work that has been done in the Housing and Urban Development Ministry. I actually met with the Deputy Secretary who looks after that area yesterday, and they did talk about that they are looking at both the residential tenancy legislation, and looking at various aspects around not just protection for rental people who rent, but also for people who rent out, if you like, and you have seen some of that discussion around insurance and that as well. So they certainly are looking at that as part of their new policy work in the new ministry, but I can't give you any more detail than that.
Thank you. Other questions here, members, before we move to offers in the debate? Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a few brief comments, and my comments largely just go to one of the key activities that were identified in the report, and that's to do with the review of the intended outcomes of terraced housing and apartment building. If people remember back to the unitary plan, this was going to be a zoning that hopefully went a large way to solving both the affordability of the housing crisis and the compact city philosophy that was certainly driving parts of it. So I just want to really highlight a few concerns I've got, because I think it's important. We've put all of our stock in that. Certainly the expectation of people, the young people that came into one of those rather agitated meetings was that, apartments and terraced housing was going to get delivered on stream, that they would be able to buy or get a foot in the market. That certainly hasn't happened since that time, and if anything is going the other way. So I think that's worthy of note. If I look at my ward as an example, where there is a lot of terraced housing getting built all over the place, Whanuapai, Hobsonville, Long Bay, Millwater, any part you look at, there's a lot of terraced housing going up. Generally, rule of thumb is they're about $1 million. That's pretty much the average, probably a little bit more. And apartments usually, they're lucky if they started around about 600K. So I would hope that the review looks at this affordability component, as well as just how best to maximise the site, because for me anyway, and I think the public as a whole, the expectation was that in return for this density, there was going to be an opening up of the market to people who have been shut out. If you look at the typical typology of a terraced development, generally they're getting a yield of 1 per 133 square metres, which means in an old average suburban site of 800 square metres, you're getting in about 6. So those projects automatically become $6 million projects as opposed to perhaps a $1 million one. You would have thought in the standardisation that's occurring that that would be reflected in the price, particularly if you look at terraced housing. Generally, they're being put up by self-employed suburban contractors with low overheads, as opposed to apartments which have the complications of lifts and basement, and are done by commercial operators with bigger overheads. So everything on the face of it is in favour of the terraced housing model, but that's not been reflected in the affordability component. And if you look at the New Zealand Planning Institute, they make a number of recommendations where the terraced housing typology could be improved by minimising regulatory barriers, standardised plans, building at scale, winning over the community. Well, all those things are actually happening, and the community doesn't have to be won over there. They take what's dished up to them, unfortunately. So all those things are already being met now, but that's not been reflected in the pricing. So I would hope that in this kind of key activity, that there's more emphasis put on the affordability part of it rather than just fitting in. The other part of that could be worked on too is the visual appearance. If we compare our terraced housing apartments that are going up with, say, like those in the Netherlands, for instance, where they've been doing it for a lot longer, it's a far more appealing visual product and has consequences looking down the generations rather than row upon row of kind of repetitive, bland appearances. That doesn't characterise a lot of them, but does characterise enough. I think in a couple of decades' time, they're going to look quite different. Whereas if you look at the Netherlands, you've got something that actually improves the public realm. So I think, Mr. Chair, that if we're going to review this, that those elements, both the visual and the affordability component, need to be front and centre, because in big parts of Auckland, these developments are proceeding at a pace, and they're not realising the outcomes in terms of primarily affordability, but in some instances visual appearance also. The only other quick point I would make that my colleague alluded to was the desirability of looking at how the terraced apartments and housing and apartments perform when they abut existing residential developments. So all the ones I'm talking about are greenfield, so there is no kind of effect on surrounding neighbourhoods. But in other areas, like in Browns Bay, you have terraced housing and apartment on one side of the road, and on the other side you have mixed housing, suburban or urban, whatever it might happen to be. And what is now coming to the fore is that people have got enough of the sites together to start actually developing. So you have people that once enjoyed a certain amount of amenity that is getting completely cut out and causing a great deal of angst in the community, and questioning the rationale for that zoning in that location. So I guess what I'm trying to suggest is that there are issues coming through, and there are going to be a lot more of them. It would be nice if we're identifying them and trying to seek some sort of solutions, even if that means plan changes.
Good points there. Thank you, Councillor Walker.
I won't repeat the comments of my fellow councillor,
Thank you.
but I entirely endorse them. And so that was entirely endorse them. I'll add a few more to the mix. And it certainly goes to the circumstance where you've got terrace and apartment dwellings being built that are abutting existing residential developments. And across parts of the ward that we represent, you've got existing homes that have got views out to sea. And one of the most important things that the people in those homes, and sometimes these are retired people, families and the like, have, is that view out. And if this terrace and apartment dwelling goes up, and particularly if it exceeds the unitary plan, people's lives get turned upside down. Yeah. And when I say upside down, they lose their amenity, they lose that view, and if it's a retired person, sometimes that's incredibly important to them. And I know of one elderly gentleman that is in precisely this predicament. They lose a whole lot of value on their property, a whole lot of value, sometimes probably well in excess of $100,000, probably more. So their life is turned upside down. When these developments occur non-notified, because the officers consider it to be less than minor, it's certainly not less than minor to the abutting neighbour or neighbours. And certainly one of the things that's been brought to my attention when I've looked into these developments, I've looked at the plans, I've been through them, is that often they are not to the quality that we would expect, that the parking in some of these developments is negligible, and we know that frankly, in many instances, people don't have to provide any parking, but there isn't even parking for bicycles. There's scarcely any parking for alternatives. So we might not be requiring parking for cars, but we're not allowing sufficient parking for other things. And I'm talking about a situation where these bikes need to be at the ground floor level, not in a circumstance where somebody has to hike them up some stairs or up an escalator, because frankly, that doesn't work. And when I look at the quality of the materials in some of these developments and the body corporate provisions, I think that often these apartment developments are going to be set up for disaster, because we know in many instances, and it's been reported in the papers, the quality of the materials that we're using have got limited duration. Maybe you're looking at 15, 20 years. So these buildings are going to require substantial work. They're almost certainly going to become the leaky buildings of the future. And when the apartment dwellers have to club in to fund these developments, these repairs, many of them are not able to do it. And we're experiencing that now across our communities, and it's going to escalate and get even worse. So my concern is that we need to have this monitoring sooner rather than later. I'm seeing the evidence of it on the ground. I don't think it's adequate to just push it out for a year or the like. We need much closer and better and faster oversight. And our communities are demanding that, certainly of me, because I have to front up to meetings with people and they bring these things directly to my attention. We're going to see a lot more of these sorts of meetings. So my plea is to have more urgent monitoring, better monitoring, so that we know what's going on, because the officers aren't feeding this information through to us.
Thank you. We'll look, wrap it there. Pena and, Mayor.
Yeah, I just want to speak briefly to this. Obviously, housing is a work in progress, but what we've been hearing is a bit of glass half empty, and I want to talk a bit more from the glass half full perspective. Last month, you saw the report from Council that we had record building consents issued for June, highest ever in the history of this city, and for the first time, we've exceeded 14,000 building consents issued. We are, for the first time in years, actually building at a level that approximates the ongoing growth of the city, though we still have a shortfall to make up. Secondly, I agree with what people have said about affordability. Obviously, this is an expensive city to live in, but again, in the last couple of years, we've seen land prices, if you read what David Norman has written to all of us, land prices dropping by about 6% because of the unitary plan. And I want to acknowledge the councillors around this table that voted for that. I think you all did. You all voted for the unitary plan, and that has had the impact that we wanted it to have. You also all voted for the unitary plan that talked about intensive housing. And you knew exactly what you were doing, that we're going to create more intensive housing because we weren't going to keep moving out south of the Bombay Hills and north to the Brenderwins. We need a more compact city. Yes, Councillor Walker, that does create some challenges. I've seen it done well and I've seen it done badly in Botany long before the unitary plan, well in an area like Hobsonville Point, where I think you have had that structure plan and decent development. We've talked about homelessness and acknowledge the work that Kathy Casey has done on that. But in the last month, we will have hit the record of 1,000 people who were homeless before being housed under Housing First. 1,000 people. I'm really proud of that record. Do we have more to do? Of course we have more to do. Do we need more social housing? Of course we do. But we actually have got 3,500 social houses now that have been funded for Auckland for the next 3 years. We want also, I think, we've got to look at the issue of inclusionary zoning, but that's for us to do, and that's the work that Kataraina Maki is doing, because that's what we've instructed her to do. So, do we have challenges on the housing front? Yes, of course we do. Do we need to monitor it? Of course we do. Are we still building leaky housing? I hope not. But if we are, then the submissions we've made under this report to central government about not having the liability come back on the last person standing, which was council, that's important. And the quality of the building products and materials and how we want to have a national register for those, that's important. So we are addressing a lot of those problems. We are making progress. We've still got some distance to go. But I want to thank officials for the work that they've done on this and the ongoing work that's going on. We have got a more joined up process with central government than we have ever had before. Doesn't mean to say they do everything we want. Sometimes they'll do things we don't want. But we have got this joined up process, and that's what this working group and this report is all about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Megoff. Councillor Hills.
No, just a quick comment, just thanking everyone for what they're doing, and it is a completely complex issue. We need desperately to do more with the government as well on renting and the issues around how we can get tenancies secured for longer, things like that, and even looking at things like rent to buy schemes, because clearly the affordable provisions and the direction is not working for the majority of people. But what I will say is that all the things, I guess, that are said around this table are the difficult ones, and they often are contradictory. So, you don't like the look of terrace housing, better design. That adds a lot of cost to a house. You want more car parks per building and per terraced home and per apartment. That can add 50 to 100 grand to each dwelling. I think slowly we are getting better. In Northcote, there's some terrace homes and apartments going for between $345,000 and $700,000 for 2-bedroom apartments. Yes, that's not in everyone's area, but slowly will get better. I know a lot of people my age and younger who are now moving to the city and moving more towards where the jobs are in the renting and buying space, because there are more apartments, there are more terrace homes, whether that's that they can buy or whether that's they can rent and actually give up the car or have lower cost of living in the transport and housing space. I guess this contrasts our issue around the northwest and the discussions around jury earlier around the huge amount of time and money wasted on people's lives travelling to and from work, largely car dependent because we haven't been able to plan or fund that infrastructure earlier. So, you know, I will say we can go on about people's views and about protecting all sorts of different things, but those all add huge costs to housing. So it's always a balance. Every step we take, every bit more pressure we put on our departments to make things better for the neighbour, but not better for the person until the neighbour wants to develop, and then they are getting angry at our consenting team because they want to do more and provide more dwellings. So we're going to have this problem continually, but I think we need to make sure that when we are advocating and fighting and campaigning on certain issues, that they actually don't have the alternate costs and problems that we continue to make in the city. So I'm seeing really good progress, but we need to ramp it up. We need to have more housing around our transport hubs. We need to have more public transport around our housing. But that does mean a cost. But I think it's not up to us to decide how people are and aren't living. And I think it's careful what we go on about when people are living on the streets and people are living in, and this on the North Shore too, not just everywhere else in the city. That if it's bad on the shore, it's bad across the other parts of the city, really bad. We've got families living in cars in my community, families, 13 people living in one house enrolled recently in a 3-bedroom house. So there are massive, massive issues, and I don't think it's up to us to start judging what people's choices are and where they want to live and what the building looks like. Sometimes it's about just getting roof overhead. So putting all those challenges to you guys, but I think it's a bit unfair to knock everything without thinking about the on-flow effects of that. So huge amount of work to do, and I'm glad we're a lot further ahead than 3 years ago, but thank you.
We certainly are a lot further ahead than 3 years ago, and that's to the efforts of our staff and the political direction that we've given staff, and the staff have responded enormously. The bodies of work that we've seen before this committee in the last 3 years directing solutions to the housing crisis have been numerous, and the success is phenomenal. Mayor Gough, I think it might be half to 3/4 full. That's because, no, I say that seriously, we've come a long way. We've got the dwelling consent numbers, and the conversion rate through to code compliance certificates is tracking as well. And I'm mindful of still a very high average dwelling price in Auckland. Some would say it's dropping back at the moment, but look, until we get the real data in, we'll read that. But look, there's Penny and Anna, your report actually covers a lot of territory, not just that project on the terrace housing and apartments zone. But I just do want to emphasise, if there's any question of quality just looking at the density and building to capacity over quality, I think the way you've written your report confirms to me that quality is absolutely top of mind, because in the two sections in the Appendix A, the word quality is mentioned 8 times. I think it's 6 or 8 times. And the project that you name is the quality intensification project. It's not the intensification project, it is about the qualities numerous. And it's not just about visual, it's not just about the quality of materials, it's the overall quality of the living environment that is created for people to live in, as the building code expects for 50 years minimum and plus. So I look forward to seeing that quality intensification project work away. And probably my one observation in that space is I am seeing a lot of the urban design panel reports. I request those on a quarterly basis, I'm seeing the number of assessments growing and growing and growing. And I'm also very aware that we've got some real challenges in our consenting space in terms of holding staff, training staff, and I know that there's a lot of work being done in that area. But I'm pretty keen to see at a future date how we can strengthen the urban design assessments at the reporting planner stage, and also beefing up the resource, and there's going to have to be some financial resource in future budgets for the urban design panel. They are doing a lot on a very oily rag at the moment, and it's going to be a matter of time before we are told that we do need to beef that area up in terms of budget. So thank you, great work. We'll put it to the vote. It's moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. We conclude. Thank you, Anna. Welcome to the roll again. And thank you, Penny. We'll go to 10. And it's on page 45. It's integrated area plan. And we have Celia Davison and David Wong for this report.